All right, come on, kids. Story time. We last left off. The blizzard had just hit. Story's gonna get real good now. So come on in. Paris, Mojica. I see Mojica, Xavier, Cassandra, Casey, and James. Come on in. Bring the rest of the kids. Chapter 5 of The Long Winter by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Do we all do the reading? After the storm. Get a blanket because it's going to get cold. On the fourth morning, there was a queer feeling in Laura's eyes. She peeped from the quilts and saw snow drifted over the bed. She heard the little crash of the stove lid and then the first crackling of the fire. Then she knew why her ears felt empty. The noise of the blizzard had stopped. "Wake up, Mary," she sang out, poking Mary with her elbow. "The blizzard's over." She jumped out of the warm bed into the air colder than ice. The hot stove seemed to give out no heat at all. The pail of snow water was almost solidly frozen, but the frosted windows were glowing with sunshine. "It's as cold as ever outside," Pa said when he came in. He bent over the stove to thaw the icicles from his mustache. They sizzled on the stove top and went up in steam. Pa wiped his mustache and went on. The winds tore a big piece of tar paper off the roof. Tight as it was nailed on, no wonder the roof leaked rain and snow. "Anyway, it's over," Laura said. It was pleasant to be eating breakfast and to see the yellow glowing window panes. "We'll have Indian summer yet," Ma was sure. "The storm was so early, it can't be the beginning of winter." "I never knew a winter to set in so early," Pa admitted. "But I don't like the feeling of things." "What things, Charles?" Ma wanted to know. Pa couldn't say exactly. He said, "There's some stray cattle by the haystacks." "Are they tearing down the hay?" Ma asked quickly. "No," said Pa. "Then what of it? If they aren't doing any harm," Ma said. "I guess they're tired out by the storm," said Pa. "They took shelter there by the haystacks. I thought I'd let them rest and eat a little before I drove them off. I can't afford to have them tear down the stacks, but they could eat a little without doing any harm. But they aren't eating." "What's wrong then?" Ma asked. "Nothing," Pa said. "They're just standing there." "That's nothing to be upset about," said Ma. "No," Pa said. He drank his tea. "I might as well go drive them off." He put on his coat and his hat and mittens and went out. After a moment, Ma said, "You might as well go with them, Laura. He may need help to drive them away from the hay." Quickly, Laura put Ma's big shawl over her head and pinned it snugly under her chin with the shawl pin. The woolen folds covered her from head to foot. Even her hands were under the shawl. Only her face was out. Outdoors, the sun glittered, hurt her eyes. She breathed a deep breath of the tingling cold and squinted her eyes to look around. The sky was hugely blue, and all the land was blowing white. The straight, strong wind did not lift the snow, but drove it scuttling across the prairie. The cold stung Laura's cheeks. It burned in her nose and tingled in her chest and came out in steam on the air. She held a fold of the shawl against her mouth, and her breath made frost on it. When she crossed the corner of the stable, she saw Pa going ahead of her and saw the cattle. She stood and stared. The cattle were standing in the sunshine and shadows by the haystacks, red and brown and spotted cattle, and one thin black one. They stood perfectly still. Every head hovered over the ground. The hairy red necks and brown necks all stretched down from the bony, gaunt shoulders to monstrous, swollen white heads. "Pa!" Laura screamed. Pa motioned to her to stay where she was. He went on trudging through the snow, flying snow, toward the creatures. They did not seem like real cattle. They stood so terribly still. In the whole herd, there was not the least movement. Only their breathing sucked their hairy hides in between their rib bones and pushed them out again. Their hip bones and their shoulder bones stood up sharply. Their legs were braced out, stiff and still, and where their heads should be, swollen white lumps seemed fast to the ground under the blowing snow. On Laura's head, the hair prickled up and a horror went down her backbone. Tears from the sun and the wind swelled out her staring eyes and rained cold on her cheeks. Paul went on slowly against the wind. He walked up the herd. Not one of the cattle moved. For a moment Paul stood looking. Then he stooped and quickly did something. Laura heard a bellow, and a red steer's back humped and jumped. The red steer ran staggering and bawling. It had an ordinary head with eyes and nose and open mouth bawling out steam on the wind. Another one bellowed out and ran a short, staggering run. Then another. Paul was doing something to them all, one by one. Their bawling rose up to the cold sky. At last they all drifted away together. They went silently in the knee-deep spray of blowing snow. Paul waved to Laura to go back to the shanty while he inspected the haystacks. "Whatever kept you so long, Laura?" Ma asked. "Did the cattle go to the back? The cattle go into the haystacks?" "No, Ma," she answered. Their heads were frozen to the ground." "That can't be," Ma exclaimed. "It must be one of Laura's queer notions," Mary said, busily knitting in her chair by the stove. "How could cattle's heads freeze to the ground, Laura? It's really worrying, the way you talk sometimes." "Well, ask Pa then," Laura said shortly. She was not able to tell Ma and Mary what she felt. She felt that somehow, in the wild night and storm, the stillness that was underneath all the sounds on the prairie had seized the cattle. When Pa came in, Ma asked him, "What was wrong with the cattle, Charles?" "Their heads were frozen over with ice and snow," Pa said. "Their breath froze over their eyes and their noses, and they couldn't see nor breathe." Laura stopped sweeping. "Pa, their own breath? Smothering them?" she said in horror. Pa understood how she felt. He said, "They're all right now, Laura. I broke the ice off their heads. They're breathing now, and I guess they'll make it to the shelter somewhere." Carrie and Mary were wide-eyed, and even Ma looked horrified. She said briskly, "Get your sweeping done, Laura. And Charles, for pity's sake, why don't you take off your wraps and warm yourself?" "I got something to show you," Pa said. He took his hand carefully out of his pocket. "Look here, girls. Look at what I found in the haystack." Slowly he opened his hands. In the hollow of his mitten sat a little bird. "Why, it's standing straight up," Mary explained, touching it lightly with her fingertips. They had never seen a little bird like that. It was small, but looked exactly like the pictures of the great auk in Pa's big green book, The Wonders of the Animal World. It had the same white breast and black back and wings, the same short legs placed far back, and the same large webbed feet. It stood straight up on its short legs, like a tiny man with black coat and trousers and white shirt front. Its little black wings were like arms. "What is it, Pa? Oh, what is it?" Carrie cried in delight, and she held Grace's eager hands. "Mustn't touch, Grace." "I never saw anything like it," said Pa. "It must have been tired out in the storm winds and dropped down and stuck against the haystack. It had crawled into the hay for shelter." "It's a great auk," Laura declared, "only it's a little one." "It's a full grown. It isn't nestling," said Ma. "Look at its feathers." "Yes, it's full grown, whatever it is," Pa agreed. The little bird stood up straight on Mary's soft palm and looked at them with its bright black eyes. "It's never seen humans before," said Pa. "How do you know, Pa?" Mary asked. "Because it isn't afraid of us," Pa said. "Oh, can we keep it, Pa? Can't we, Ma?" Carrie begged. "Well, that depends," Pa said. Mary's fingertips touched the little bird all over, while Laura told her how white its smooth breast was and how very black its back and tail and little wings. Then they let Grace carefully touch it. The little ox sat still and looked at them. They set it on the floor and it walked a little while. Then it pushed its webbed feet tiptoe against the boards and flapped its little wings. "It can't get going," said Pa. "It's a water bird. It must start from the water where it can use those webbed feet to get up speed." Finally, they put it in a box in the corner. It stood there looking at them with its round, bright black eyes, and they wondered what it ate. "That was a queer storm all around," said Pa. "I don't like it." "Why, Charles, it was only a blizzard," Ma said. "We'll likely have nice weather now. It's beginning to warm up a little already." Mary took up her knitting again, and Laura went on sweeping. Pa took by the window, and after a while Carrie led Grace away from the little ock, and they looked out too. "Oh, look, jackrabbits!" Carrie exclaimed. All around the stable, dozens of jackrabbits were hopping. "The rascals have been living on our hay all through the storm," Pa said. "I ought to take my gun and get us a rabbit stew." But he had been standing at the window, looking at them without making a move toward his gun. "Please let them go, Pa, this one time," Laura pleaded. When they came because they had to find shelter. Pa looked at Ma, and Ma smiled. "We aren't hungry, Charles, and I'm thankful we all got through the storm." "Well, I guess I can spare the jackrabbits a little hay," said Pa. He took the water pail and went to the well. The air that came in when he opened the door was very cold, but the sun was already beginning to melt, and the snow on the south side of the shanty. Chapter 6, Indian Summer. There were only slivers of ice on the water pail next morning, and the day was sunny and warm. Pa took his traps to set them for muskrats and big slough, and Carrie and Grace played outdoors. The little auk would not eat. It did not utter a sound, but Carrie and Laura thought it looked up at them desperately. It would die without food, but did not seem to know to eat anything that they offered it. At dinner time, Pa said that the ice was melting on Silver Lake. He thought that the strange little bird could take care of itself on the open water. So after dinner, Laura and Mary put on their coats and hoods, and they went with Pa to set the little auk free. Silver Lake was ruffling pale blue and silver under the warm, pale sky. Ice was around the edges, and flat gray cakes of ice floated on the ripples. Pa took the little auk from his pocket. In its smooth black coat and near white shirt front with tiny feathers, it stood up on his palm. It saw the land and the sky and the water, and eagerly it rose up on its toes and stretched out its little wings. But it could not go. It could not fly. Its wings were too small for lift. "It does not belong on land," said Pa. "It's a water bird." He squatted down by the thin white ice on the lake's edge and reached far out. He tipped the little bird from his hand and into the blue water. For the briefest instant, there it was, and then it wasn't there. Out among the ice cakes it went streaking a black speck. "It gets up speed, and those webbed feet," said Pa, "to lift it from. There it goes." Laura barely had time to see it, rising tiny in the great blue sparkling sky. Then in all that glittering of sunshine, it was gone. Her eyes were too dazzled to see it anymore. But Pa stood looking, still seeing it going toward the south. They never knew what became of the strange little bird that had come in the dark with the storm from that far north and went southward in the sunshine. They never saw nor heard of another bird like it. They never found out what kind of bird it was. Pa, still looking far away across the land, all the prairie curs were softly colored. Pale browns and tans, fawn and gray, faint greens, purples, and far away they were gray-blue. The sunshine was warm and the air was hazy. Only a little cold was around Laura's feet near the thin, dry ice of the lake's edge. Let the bird go. Everyone was still. No wind stirred the gray, bleached grass, and no birds were on the water or in the sky. The lake faintly lapped at the rim of the stillness. Laura looked at Pa, and she knew it was listening too. The silence was so terrible as cold is. It was stronger than any sound. It could stop the water's lapping and the thin, faint ringing in Laura's ears. The silence was no sound, no movement, no thing. That was its terror. Laura's heart jumped and jumped, trying to get away from it. I don't like it, Pa said, slowly shaking her head. I don't like the feel of the weather. There's something. He could not say what he meant, and he said again, I don't like it at all. Nobody could say exactly that anything was wrong with the weather. It was beautiful Indian summer. Frost came every night and sometimes a light freeze, but all those were sunny. Every afternoon, Laura and Mary took long walks in the warm sunshine, while Carrie played with Grace near the house. Get yourselves full of sunshine while you can, Ma said. It will soon be winter. You'll have to stay indoors. In the bright, soft weather, they were storing up sunshine and fresh air in themselves for the winter when they could not have any. But often, while they were walking, Laura quickly looked at the north. She did not know why. Nothing was there. Sometimes in the warm sunshine, she stood still and listened, and she was uneasy. There was no reason why. It's going to be a hard winter, Pa said, the hardest we ever saw. Why, Charles, Ma protested. We're having fine weather now. That only early storm is no reason why the whole winter will be bad. I've trapped muskrats a good many years, said Pa, and I never saw them build their walls so thick. Muskrats, said Ma. The wild things know somehow, Pa said. Every wild creature's got ready for a hard winter. Maybe they just made ready for that bad storm, Ma suggested. But Pa was not persuaded. I don't like the feel of these things myself, he said. This weather seems to be holding back something that might let loose any minute. If I were a wild animal, I'd hunt my hole and dig it plenty deep. If I were a wild geese, I'd spread my wings and get out of here. Ma laughed at him. You are a goose, Charles. I don't know when I've seen a more beautiful Indian summer.